Hello, YouTubers. Today I'm speaking to you via Skype. Today we're going to be talking about a man. Now, this man, I met him 15 years ago. I was told there was nothing left. No reason, no conscience, no understanding, and even the most rudimentary sense of life or death, of good or evil, right or wrong. I met this 6-year-old child with his blank, pale, emotionless face, and the blackest eyes. The devil's eyes. I spent 8 years trying to reach him, and then another 7 trying to keep him locked up, because I realized that what was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil. Hello, YouTubers. You're on the second episode of The Final Cut, and today I'm going to be going over John Carpenter's 1978 classic, Halloween. Now, before Jason, before Freddy, before Candyman, before even Ghostface, there was Michael Myers in the original slasher horror film. Halloween is the film that started it all. There would be no Friday the 13th, Scream, or even A Nightmare on Elm Street, and the countless other slasher horror films in the late 70s, early 80s onwards without Halloween. Now, John Carpenter directed it. It was one of Jamie Lee Curtis's earlier movies. She plays Laurie Strode, and Donald Pleasance plays Dr. Sam Loomis. Yes, Loomis, similar to Billy Loomis in Scream, and similar to Sam Loomis, the lover, secret lover, in Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho. And Jamie Lee Curtis is Janet Leigh's daughter, so there you go. A little nod to Psycho there. But it's a very, very independent production, and really, it's a great horror film, I would say. And it's not like the other sequels or the countless other copycats and other films that mimicked it afterwards. It's a very old-fashioned type of horror film with a lot of built-up suspense. It starts off, the main antagonist and kind of the main focus of the film is Michael Myers. So you basically start off with him as a child. And it's a brilliant shot sequence where like you see him put on a Halloween mask and it's in first-person view. It took 2 days to film that sequence, and his sister's babysitting him. She's like getting her clothes on and stuff. And in first person, you see him get a kitchen knife, walk up the stairs, and brutally stab his sister to death. And then it goes back down, and then finally the mask comes off. You see the parents screaming, police, and it's Michael Myers. And you just see him there in shock holding a knife. And that is a very powerful opening scene. And it really adds a lot to the character because it doesn't give away too much. In the movie, you basically don't have Michael Myers have a motivation for killing the young people, mostly babysitters, but like there's just something that drives him, and that little sequence there shows what's to come later in the film. So then it goes a couple of years later, and it's 1978 on Halloween, and Donald Pleasance is introduced as Dr. Sam Loomis. He's with a nurse, and they're talking about Michael Myers. He ends up escaping this mental institute. And Dr. Loomis knows how evil this man is. Knows what is hiding behind this guy's eyes. It's pure evil. So he ends up getting away, and throughout the process of the film, Dr. Sam Loomis is trying to search for Michael Myers. because the pure evil is just let loose and out in the open. So that's where it starts off there. Then we go to school, and we find Jamie Lee Curtis's character, Laurie Strode, and her friends. Through this, we get to see her life. She's just an everyday teenager. She's not as promiscuous as the other girls. She's basically a virgin and very old-fashioned. But I'll get to that later. And then throughout this, we see Michael Myers going throughout the town. It's very effective, just breathing scenes and like somebody watching them. And Laurie, he ends up following Laurie a bit. She has this feeling like somebody's been stalking her, and it turns out there's nobody there. But it's really Michael, and we see it through his perspective. Just heavy breathing. And Dr. Sam Loomis goes into town, talks to the sheriff. The sheriff is the father of one of Laurie Strode's friends, and pretty much you find out he stole a mask. Now, in the real-life production, it was basically a William Shatner Star Trek Captain Kirk mask. They took the eyebrows off, brushed the hair out, and spray painted it white. And Nick Castle, I may add, Nick Castle, yes, the same Nick Castle who directed Major Payne, Dennis the Menace, yeah, that Nick Castle. August Rush, that Nick Castle was the original Michael Myers. He does such a great job. Now, he was just a filmmaker friend of John Carpenter's, and he was just to stand in there and just help around the set, so they needed somebody to play Michael Myers, so he ended up going behind the mask. And it really adds a lot of physicality to it. It's not just a stand-in role. Like, he's really menacing, and then the mechanical movements of Michael Myers are just fantastic. And I have to say, unlike some of the sequels, you could tell this one's the original Michael Myers. The other ones just feel too robotic and just not very authentic. Nick Castle's was very kind of rigid, robotic, but it had a certain flow to it and felt authentic for that character. It felt like it was actually a certain type of entity. He basically goes on and ends up one by one killing the babysitters around town. And a lot of them are just like Laurie's friends. And Laurie is a very all-American girl, and probably one of the earliest female heroines in the horror genre. She's a virgin. Now, a lot of people may say that she survived because she was a virgin and was able to go after Michael, but John Carpenter pretty much said she wasn't messing around or anything, so she was more focused on killing Michael. It didn't necessarily have to do with the fact that she was a virgin. So he kills them off one by one. It's just crazy sequences. Kills off a couple of her friends. Laurie gets worried, checks on them, notices that they're dead. There's this one crazy part where she finds like the sister's tombstone, Michael Myers' sister's tombstone, on top of one of her friends, and she's like brutally stabbed to death, like wrapped around a bed. And there is this crazy sequence, a brilliantly directed sequence by John Carpenter here, where she's by a closet and they end up having the exposure and the lighting just a little bit off, and you see him just suddenly appear, just like fade in, and it's such a great and effective sequence. Meanwhile, she has to basically get the other two kids to safety. It's a huge chase. She gets him a couple of times, but she doesn't keep stabbing him. He gets up, and it's this crazy scene with the music where he just like gets up and then like turns over. It's so fantastic, and it's funny references and as fans seeing the original Thing on, and you know later that John Carpenter directed the remake of The Thing with Kurt Russell in '82. Anyways, Dr. Sam Loomis is like looking around. Nobody's taking him seriously. He finds out somebody screaming. Laurie's just like screaming. The kids are in safety in the house. She's screaming. Basically, everybody in the suburbs is like not paying attention to her. And that's what makes it so brilliant. It's not like in the wastelands of Texas. It's not like at a titty twister in Mexico. It's not somewhere where it's like frozen. It's not in the middle of nowhere. It's like in a suburban neighborhood. Just like a neighborhood where I live right now. And like anything could happen. This killer could come into your house when you do not know it, and it could be too late, and he could kill you. And that makes it frightening, in my opinion. It makes it so realistic. But nobody helps her. She goes back. She stabs him with a knife, and then that doesn't work. So there's this famous closet scene where she basically hides in a closet. He's looking for her. Busts through, and then she like untwists a hanger and stabs him in the neck. Dr. Loomis hears the screamings, comes in, and he basically shoots him 6 times. And Michael Myers then like falls out of, it's like a closet area, bedroom, falls out on the balcony onto the yard. And the kids refer to Michael Myers as a boogeyman. You can't beat the boogeyman. After that, he goes to check that Michael Myers is still on the ground. And it turns out he disappears. So, like, it wasn't originally sequel bait. There wasn't going to be a sequel. Much like other John Carpenter films, this is kind of like open-ended. Like Big Trouble in Little China or Ghost of Mars. What makes this wonderful is that it shows shots of the house, the neighborhood, just the surrounding areas, and the lawn. And it just showcases that, like, this evil could be anywhere right now. It could live, walk, breathe, be anywhere. And that's what makes it terrifying. And that's how Halloween was supposed to end. And even though he goes through a lot of stuff, gets stabbed, shot, lives through a lot of stuff, what makes Michael Myers so unique compared to Jason or Freddy is that he's a living being. I mean, as far as we know, he's not dead. He hasn't come back from the dead. He survived a lot of stuff, but he's kind of a real person at the moment, as far as we know. Definitely could be some supernatural elements, but as far as we know, in the first Halloween, he is just like a force of evil. But Laurie Strode is a very straight-laced woman. She wasn't promiscuous, having sex, getting killed. Now, this kind of set up the horror movie rules, but like John Carpenter said in the commentary, it wasn't really the fact that she was just a virgin. It was more that she wasn't screwing around and doing other things, so she was able to pay attention and fight against Michael Myers, where the other ones were caught off guard. Jamie Lee Curtis gives a great performance. It was one of her earlier movies, one of her first movies. She thought she did such a bad job and that she was going to be fired the first night. John Carpenter called her the first night and just said, I like what I saw here. And she's just great, all-American girl, and really kind of starts the whole... It's not just Scream Queen, but I would say female heroine in horror films that you later on see in like Nancy and Nightmare on Elm Street. Kind of like movies in general you see in Ellen Ripley and Alien. Just stuff like that. She's one of the more stronger female heroines and actually takes action. One thing I didn't like is that like once Michael Myers is down, she just like dropped the knife or did something. But still, she was a very proactive character and wasn't just a damsel in distress. She actually fought. Even though she was afraid, she fought against Michael Myers. And there's something to be had in that and made it special in the horror genre. That it wasn't just a damsel in distress and just like, oh my god. She actually like did something to protect not only herself, but the two kids she was babysitting. One of the kids and then the other kid, she didn't have to babysit. The other babysitter to do their job and got killed in like the washroom. For the role of Dr. Loomis, Donald Pleasence does such a great job and is really into the character, not only in this film, but the numerous sequels he was in. And really just delves into the role. And you can tell it's almost as if he spent like the past 30 years, 20 years with Michael Myers. Originally, Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing were offered the roles, but turned it down, so they ended up going Donald Pleasence. But Christopher Lee later on cited that was one of the biggest regrets of his life, is not taking on the role of Dr. Loomis. The other kids did a great job, even her friend that said totally like all the time. It wasn't anything too like Oscar or like anything like worthy of an Oscar, but they did their job and they're like regular teenagers. I remember there's a scene where they're them talking, and then there's also when Laurie just like smoked one little cigarette of marijuana in her friend's car, and like they had Don't Fear the Reaper by Blue Oyster Cult. Just different stuff like that. So they pretty much kind of like played the everyday like, oh yeah, let's just have fun, screw around type of thing. But I like that Laurie wasn't like that, and that made it special because not only was she proactive, but she wasn't like a total slut or anything. She was just an everyday girl next door, and I love that about Laurie Strode. And that makes you root for her as a protagonist against Michael Myers. And Michael Myers is interesting. He's the antagonist, but like the film is so focused on him, like through Dr. Loomis, the flashbacks, and through Laurie Strode. And even more so if you watch the sequels, but I won't go into that until I go into Halloween 2. But yeah, it was a $300,000 budget movie. It ended up grossing over like $47 million at the U.S. box office, and ended up being one of the highest grossing independent films at the time. The highest grossing independent film at that time. So it really, really did well in the box office, and even had more of a cult following and spawned many sequels. Now, John Carpenter just did the original one, and then wrote the second one, and also did the score for the second one, produced the third one, and that was pretty much as far as he went. Jamie Lee Curtis ended up starring in Halloween 2, and then later on, in the 20th anniversary, 1998, made Halloween H2O, which is one of the best sequels. Like New Nightmare, it's like the 7th movie that was really great after a whole bunch of shitty sequels. But Halloween, the effects were great. I mean, it was very practical. It wasn't anything too crazy like Friday the 13th or like A Nightmare on Elm Street where there's dreams. But it's some frightening imagery, but it was really well shot and a lot of practicality in it. Like I said, that closet shot is really crazy where he goes through the doorway, she's there, and then like kind of like the exposure and the contrast changes and you see his face appear. That was done well. The point of view shots, the heavy breathing and then just following as if like somebody's watching was done well. The editing and timing with the music, especially there was this part where he was following the girls and the car stops. They say something and the car stops. And it's almost like he heard them and it's very frightening. You don't see, there's a car mechanic they found a dead body of. You don't see his death on screen, but you see everybody else's. And it was pretty gory, crazy stuff actually. And really, really nuts. As far as like John Carpenter, I mean, it's great work. I love John Carpenter films. Around this time, he did Assault on Precinct 13. After this, did The Fog, The Thing, Escape from New York. I love all his movies. I even love John Carpenter's Vampires, Goes to Mars, Big Trouble in Little China, Escape from LA. So there's something special about this film. Because after this, everybody kind of repeated the same thing and just had like Jason. And then later on had Freddy, but Freddy was kind of different. But it was like Jason, and then you had like Prom Night. And just like different slasher horror films. And the sequel, one thing I didn't like about the sequel is it had to go and coincide itself with other slasher horror films with like a large amount of sex, language, drugs, and then violence and gore. And there's something about this one that made it special. It's very realistic, grounded, but what made it special is it had that element of suspense and build-up. And it wasn't just like torture candy, torture porn. It wasn't gory. It wasn't. They had some language and nudity, but it wasn't excessive like it was in the sequels and other slasher horror films. This is very much kind of like the beginning of the slasher horror genre, but it still had elements of like Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho and Rear Window and other stuff like that, where it was very kind of old school. And let me get to the music. John Carpenter. And John Carpenter's just excellent all around in music, but the score to Halloween is so iconic. I mean, you have to watch this on Halloween, and just that song is Halloween. That little dun 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 bum bum bum. I mean, it's just great. Even Roger Ebert on here gave it 4 stars. Halloween is an absolutely merciless thriller. I would compare it to Psycho. Yeah. Check out Halloween. I mean, in my opinion, it's a 5 out of 5, 4 out of 4, 10 out of 10. Halloween makes the final cut. And it's so inspirational. I mean, it started the slasher horror genre, but without Halloween, we may have never had Scream from Kevin Williamson, directed by Wes Craven. You could tell there's a lot from Halloween that he was inspired by and put into Scream. What I find funny is the name of Loomis, and then how like Psycho connects to Halloween, connects to Scream, and they kind of have similar elements that connects them and like different references. So I think it's kind of cool that way, how like a pinnacle of certain decades of horror films can inspire later on classics, soon to be classics, and they're each their own entity within that decade, but then they share kind of common threads and inspiration. I find that fascinating. Overall, it's a fantastic film. I would recommend it. Now, if you want, you can catch my next review in which I will be going over the 1985 classic, Fright Night. But yeah, you should totally check out Halloween.